Hello and welcome to my channel. This is the Frivolous Friday, so based on the picture that we've got, I'm going to do some literary facts. We'll see how we go with this. The original Fahrenheit 451 was The Fireman. Ray Bradbury and his publishers thought The Fireman was a boring title, so they called a local fire station and asked what temperature paper burned at. The firemen put Bradbury on hold while they burned a book, then reported back with the temperature, and the rest is history. And Bradbury also wrote the 1956 screenplay from Moby Dick. Don Quixote was the best-selling novel of all time, with over 500 million copies sold. That's the best-selling novel, but if we're talking about the best-selling book of all time, then that's the Bible. Edgar Allan Poe originally wanted a parrot to repeat the word nevermore. Wisely, Poe decided that a parrot didn't fit the melancholy poem of his poem, and he settled on a raven. The first publisher willing to print copies of Lolita was Olympia Press. Vladimir Nabokov's novel was so controversial that only one press was willing to publish his book in 1955. Putnam in the United States changed his mind in 1958 after the novel became a hit. Charles Dickens believed in the supernatural, and he belonged to something called the Ghost Club. He was also a big fan of hypnotism. The protagonist in C.S. Lewis's science fiction trilogy was modelled after his friend and fellow author J.R.R. Tolkien. Aside from serving as a character in C.S. Lewis's series, he went on to write The Hobbit. John Steinbeck's original manuscript of Mice and Men was eaten by a dog. Steinbeck's puppy Toby was left alone one evening and effectively ate some real important homework. Steinbeck wrote of the incident to his agent and said, "I was pretty mad, but the poor little fellow may have been acting critically." Anna Karenina is over 800 pages long, but it was originally published in serialized form. The Russian Messenger published serialized excerpts from 1873 to 1877. But since Leo Tolstoy's political views clashed with that of the editors, the first full issue of the novel was as a book. Bear with me with this one. Gabriel Garcia Marquez refused to allow 100 Years of Solitude to be made into a film. It's odd because most of his works have been made into films. Marquez stated that the reason is they would cast someone like Robert Redford, and most of us do not have relatives who look like Robert Redford. To Kill a Mockingbird is Harper Lee's only novel, even though it won a Pulitzer Prize and spent 88 weeks in the bestseller list. She currently lives in Monroeville, Alabama, and is allegedly working on her memoirs. The first edition of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was published in 1964 and was also pretty racist. For example, in the first edition, the Oompa Loompas were described as black pygmies from the very deepest and darkest part of Africa jungle, where no man had gone before. Also important of note is that Charlie was originally described by Dahl as a small Negro boy. Catch-22 took 8 years to complete. The writing process started in 1953 when Joseph Heller thought the first few lines. It then took him a week to send his first chapter to his agent. After Heller released a third of the book, his agent started to solicit publishers, and Simon & Schuster bought it. It then took 8 years for Heller to deliver the full manuscript. The Catcher in the Rye is J.D. Salinger's only published novel, and it forced him into hiding. 2 years after the book was published in 1951, Salinger became a recluse in Cornish, New Hampshire. After giving a report to a local newspaper there, it ran as a major scoop, and Salinger was so enraged that he rarely spoke publicly again. Ernest Hemingway hated the original cover of Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. Even though the cover is iconic, when Fitzgerald lent a copy of the book to Hemingway, he immediately disliked it. Fitzgerald assured him that if he could just start reading the book, he'd understand it more clearly. The manuscript for A Movable Feast was stored in the basement of the Ritz Hotel in Paris. In 1928, Ernest Hemingway stored 2 trunks that contained notebooks from the years he lived in Paris. Then in 1956, Hemingway retrieved the trunks and got to work transcribing them into his memoirs. The final product was published 3 years after Hemingway's death. The band U2 borrowed the chapter title of Lord of the Flies to name one of their songs. Chapter 7 of Lord of the Flies is titled Shadows and Tall Trees, which U2 used as the final track in their debut album, Boy. Pride and Prejudice was originally called First Impressions. But when the novel was initially rejected by publishers, Jane Austen made significant rewrites, including a title change. The revisions were made between 1811 and 1812. The monster in Frankenstein has no name, but Mary Shelley once referred to him as Adam. Many people mistakenly think of the monster is named Frankenstein, when in fact he was never given a name in the novel, but during a reading of the book, Shelley referred to the monster as Adam, a nod to the Garden of Eden. The original title for Where the Wild Things Are was Where the Wild Horses Are, and it would have featured horses. The reason for the change was that Maurice Sendak couldn't draw horses, and when his editor asked if he could draw, his reply was things. Things are exactly what ended up in the book. Okay, let's move on to another site and see what we get. Literary facts. This is from factinate.com. If you're a true bookworm, chances are you've been called a bibliophile. The bibliophile is a book lover, and the word first appeared in print in 1824. The word bookworm dates back to 1580 and was used by Ben Jonson in his satirical play Cynthia's Revels, or The Fountain of Self-Love. According to Google, as of 2010, there are roughly 130 million books in print throughout the world. While counting the exact number is virtually impossible, the estimate was generated through an advanced Google algorithm that analysed more than 150 pieces of metadata relating to the world's books, and by discarding anything that was a duplicate or not by definition a book. They haven't been to my house. In September 2017, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints published printer's manuscript of the Book of Mormon. The book is a handwritten copy of the original dated manuscript and reportedly sold for a record-setting $35 million. The Dewey Decimal System is a library classification system created by Melville Dewey in 1876. The system allows for books to be added to a library based on their subject matter rather than in order in which they were published. The classification number that is assigned to the books makes it possible to find any book and return it to its rightful place on the shelf. Dewey is used in 200,000 libraries across 135 countries. The top 10 best-selling novels of all time have sold a combined total of just over 1.56 billion copies. Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code comes in at number 10 with 80 million sold, and the classic novel Don Quixote by Miguel Cervantes is number 1 with 500 million copies sold. I don't know why. I've never read Don Quixote. Okay. The Japanese word tsundoku describes a person who buys more books than they will ever be able to read in their lifetime. That's me. The word is a combination of 3 Japanese words, tsunde, which means to stack things, oku meaning to leave a while, and doku meaning to read. I wonder what Sudoku means then. When put together, they basically translate to book hoarder. That's me. The term bestseller as it applies to books is relative. A bestseller list is generated from sales data supplied by BookNet Canada and NPD BookScan in the US, and then further curated. Sales numbers are usually compiled each week, and then newspapers like New York Times, The Globe, The Mail in Canada publish the results in bestseller lists for fiction and non-fiction. Amazon's bestseller list is based on sales and is updated hourly to reflect the top sellers in the site in close to real time. None of the lists divulge the exact number of copies sold, but generally it takes a minimum of 500 to 1,000 in the first week to appear in Amazon's list, about 3,000 for the Washington Post and about 9,000 for the New York Times. Interesting. I always wondered. Book nerds are known for loving the smell of old books, and believe it or not, there is a word for it. Bibliosmia means the act of smelling books, and to some it is as aromatic as perfume. And speaking of, there are more than a couple of perfumes on the market that are meant to replicate the aroma of old books. My husband just gagged. Beatrix Potter's most famous work, Peter Rabbit, was rejected a whopping 6 times by publishers. Yes, watch the movie. Potter ended up printing 250 copies herself and distributing them to family and friends. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was among that group and bought one for his children. When those sold out, she printed 200 more. In 1902, she was finally able to get it published with a traditional publisher, and since then Peter Rabbit has sold 45 million copies and been translated into 36 languages. Beginning with the novel's popularization in the 18th century, the word "a novel" started appearing on the cover under the title. While it might seem obvious to the modern reader that they are reading a novel, in the novel's early days, the genre wasn't clearly labelled on a shelf, so identifying the book as a novel was essential. A novel still occasionally appears on modern works of fiction, partly out of tradition, and occasionally when the title and cover alone doesn't make its subject clear. Stephen King was once taken for a vandal in an Australian bookshop where he was secretly signing copies of his books. A customer in the shop noticed a man walk in off the street and start signing books, and unaware it was King, she notified the store staff. See, don't mess with Australians. The misunderstanding was eventually cleared up, and 5 out of 6 books were given to community groups for fundraisers. The other book was purchased by the customer. Many famous authors have chosen to publish under a pen name. In some cases, it's to publish and write something outside of their well-known genre, in another under-the-radar kind of way. In her lifetime, Agatha Christie published 66 detective novels and 15 short story collections. But few people knew that she wrote 6 romance novels under the name Mary Westmacott. In 2013, J.K. Rowling secretly published an adult detective novel under the pseudonym Robert Galbraith. She created the alter ego to escape the pressure of being the author of Harry Potter and to allow the book to be evaluated on its own. Even Rowling's own publisher didn't know who Galbraith was when they first saw the novel. They probably rejected it too. Every year, numerous books were challenged in attempts to... No, it's actually really good. I really enjoyed them. Anyway, each year, numerous books are challenged in attempts to remove them from school curriculums or public libraries and to restrict the ability of others to access the book. The banning of a book is the actual removal of the book. Some of the most commonly banned challenged books in history includes 1984 by George Orwell, The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Reasons for challenges often include charges of racism, offensive language, and sexual explicitness. I have to say, I think To Kill a Mockingbird was either, I think that was in my kids' school to read. That's why the novels sell so much, because they make school kids read them every year.
Why do they get rid of Aquas?
I don't know. President Theodore Teddy Roosevelt was a voracious reader. He was known to read at least 1 book a day, oh my goodness, and 2 or 3 if he had a free night. That's his version of Twitter. His biggest influence was military writer Admiral Alfred Thayer Mann. His text, The Influence of Sea Power Under History, is credited with shaping Roosevelt's imperialistic thought. He also enjoyed naturalist writers such as Audubon and Spencer Fullerton Baird, who inspired him to make America's natural beauty a priority. Dr. Seuss's classic Green Eggs and Ham was written as a bet. Seuss bet his publisher $50 he could write a book in 50 words or less. The book contains exactly 50 words. I have actually heard of the 50 Shades of Grey written in 50 words or less, and I can't find it since I first found it, which is a bit of a shame. Ray Bradbury's famous dystopian novel Fahrenheit 451 was originally called The Fireman. Okay, we've been there, done that. They burnt the book, and it was that degree. All right. August 9 is National Book Lovers Day and is a day to celebrate the love of reading. The origin of the holiday is unknown, but Google records searches for National Book Lovers Day beginning in August 2007. In 2012, August 9 was selected as the official day, and that's when it really caught on. The slowest selling book of all time is the Oxford University Press translation of the New Testament from Coptic to Latin. Go figure. In 1716, 500 copies were printed, and it took until 1907 for the last copy to sell. I can see why that would have been racing out the door. F. Scott Fitzgerald's This Side of Paradise was first recorded use of wicked as a word for cool, to the wild celebration of Bostonians everywhere. The novel also contains the first known appearance of the word t-shirt and daiquiri, the drink. Prior to World War II, teenagers were not considered a social demographic, and there were no books being published with the teen in mind. That changed in 1942 when 17th Summer by Maureen Daly was released. The book is about first love and considered to be the first true novel specifically aimed at teens. The term young adult was coined by Young Adult Library Services Association in the 1960s to describe the 12 to 18 age range, and the literature at the time focused on mature and realistic themes for this group. Serialized fiction is a single larger story than it's published in short sequential installments. The serial format began in the 17th century as a means of reducing the cost of books. The format grew in popularity in the Victorian era and would be published as weekly or monthly installments in magazines. Charles Dickens is believed to have legitimised the format in his 1834 serial novel The Pickwick Papers, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories were originally serialised in the Strand magazine. Alice in Wonderland is a frequently banned book for its references to drugs, but China has a completely different reason for banning it. They disapproved of the author's use of talking animals in the book, and the governor of Hunan province said, "Animals should not use human language, and it is disastrous to put animals and human beings on the same level." Wonder what he thinks of Animal Farm. There are a number of commonly used phrases from literature that are actual misquotes and never appeared in the book at all. The line, "Me Tarzan, you Jane," never appeared in any of the Tarzan books, and was likely lifted from the 1932 movie Tarzan the Ape Man. Another surprising misquote is Sherlock Holmes' catchphrase, "Elementary, my dear Watson." The phrase never appears in any of the Sherlock Holmes stories, and is first used by P.G. Wodehouse in the novel P. Smith, Journalist. Jane Austen wrote First Impressions when she was just 21. Her father sent it to the publisher Thomas Cadell with the explanation of what it was and an inquiry as to how much it would cost to print it. The letter was rapidly returned with the words "declined by return of post" written on it. Fast forward 14 years, and having had success with Sense and Sensibility, she was able to get the novel published as Pride and Prejudice. In the 200 plus years since its publication, it remains Austen's most popular novel. J.K. Rowling, author of the Harry Potter series of books, is the first author to gross $1 billion for her books. Harry Potter has sold over 400 million copies around the world and has been published in 55 languages. Rowling is also one of only 5 women to be self-made billionaires. Robert Lawrence Stein, or R.L. Stein as he is best known, is the creator of the Goosebumps series of novels for kids. He first started the series in 1992, and as of 2011 he has written over 300 horror fiction novels for young readers. According to the author, the books are intended to give the kids the creeps, and it seems to have worked, since he has sold more than 400 million copies of his books, and they have been translated into 32 languages. When Victor Hugo's novel Les Miserables was published, Hugo was away on vacation. Wanting to know how the book had been received, he sent a telegram with a single question mark to his publishers. The publisher responded back with an exclamation point, signifying the book's success. Oh dear. In 1924, director Erich von Stroheim adapted Frank Norris's novel McTeague into a 9.5-hour film called Greed that literally included every aspect of the book. The studio insisted that it be cut down to 2 hours, and it was considered a flop. The modern restoration brought the film back to slightly more than 4 hours and is ranked by many critics as one of the greatest films of all time. Robert Louis Stevenson, the author of Treasure Island, Kidnapped, and Jekyll and Hyde, was born Robert Louis Balfour Stevenson. At age 18, he dropped the Balfour from his name and changed Louis to Louis, which he pronounced Louis. Okay, spellings. Alright, this might be the last one. Since its inception, the Nobel Prize in Literature has been handed out 110 times to 114 laureates. The award is given to the person who shall have produced in the field of literature the most outstanding work in an ideal direction, and has been won by writers from France more than any other country. In fact, the first recipient of the prize was French. Sully Prudhomme won in 1901 for a collection of poetry. The 1939 novel Gadsby by Ernest Vincent Wright does not use any words beginning with the letter E in the entire novel. The book was written as a lipogram, which is a kind of writing or word game in which the author deliberately excludes the common letter of the alphabet. While some letters are easier to avoid than others, E, T, and A are the most challenging to ignore. Wow. In early 20th century, a man by the name of Edward Stratemeyer revolutionized the way children's books were published. He established the Stratemeyer Syndicate, which worked on the principle of having ghostwriters produce stories in a short period of time that the syndicate would sell to publishers. Among this most popular series were Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys. Both were written under the names Carolyn Keene and Franklin W. Dixon, respectively. And we'll just do one more. In Herman Melville's novel Moby Dick, Captain Ahab has a prosthetic leg made of whalebone, which he had custom made after having his leg bitten off by the whale. The customary replacement for a missing limb at the time would have been wood, and analysts of the novel have suggested that the leg symbolises Ahab's sense of masculinity. Alright, that is a wrap. I hope you enjoyed some literary facts. I hope you enjoyed looking at this nook come to life in the dot to dot, and maybe you have a reading nook that you enjoy. Alright, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now.